Well, thanks all for joining, and it's great to have representation from CPW and the health department, and then it's always great to see Riverwatch volunteers near and far, so thanks for joining us. I have the privilege in this position to work with interns and to do a little bit of mentoring, but really what happens during that process is we start to think about these great ideas and then we hand it off to these brilliant people that can just run with it. And that's exactly what's happened here. So Noah Goodkind has been working with us for the past 6 months. Unfortunately, his last day with at least the Riverwatch team is on Friday, but on Monday he starts with another sector of CPW for a stint. So for a long time, and Barb certainly can attest to this, we have heard from volunteers and tried to create opportunities for you guys to look into the black box of your data. So what happens, Jeff, when you collect 30 years worth of data? Like what do those trends look like, and how do we start to unpack that a little bit and provide opportunities for all volunteers and particularly students to start to unravel that and ask some additional questions. So Noah has built, we asked him to build one tool, and Noah's built 3 tools in his time here, which is really fantastic. But he's going to share all 3 of those. And the design of this is to really walk through so that you can utilize all of these tools in your day-to-day, or just, what does Riverwatch have the capacity, and how do we have the capacity to share our data visually? So with that, I'll turn it over to Noah. But as you have questions, please, feel free to, raise your hand or ask Noah so that this can be interactive. We really want you to come out with this understanding where and how to access these tools and how to use kind of this neat application that Noah's put together. So with that, Noah, take it away.
Thank you, Megan. Hey, everybody. It's awesome to see so many faces in here. And so, yeah, I'm going to walk through the 3 tools that I made during my time here at CPW or with Riverwatch. And I'll start with the first one, which is being sent out right now in spring mailing to most of our groups. I'll spend a little bit of time on our second one, and then I think the bulk of the time I'll dedicate to the sort of interactive Shiny app. So with that, let me start sharing my screen. All right, is the Google Drive folder showing up all right? Awesome. So the first two tools that I'm going to talk about today, they're housed in a public Google Drive, and I think Megan will put the link in the chat at some point. And these links will also, they're not on the website yet, but they will be shortly. And so the first one that I'm going to show you is the one that is being sent out with spring mailing, and it's been generated for stations that have 30+ sampling events. And you'll see why in a second. And so we can go to one of Jeff's stations as an example, which is station 28, to do a quick overview of it. Takes a second to load sometimes on the Google Drive. We can also just download it. Here it is. So as just a quick overview of what we're looking at here, this tool summarizes the field data that's collected by you guys. So that's being temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, total hardness, phenolphthalein alkalinity, and total alkalinity. And so,
Noah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you blow up part of it for us?
Yeah, let me. Zoom in.
Thank you.
Sweet. So at the top, you get just sort of some quick data about the station. And so the goal of this sort of document is for volunteers to have it in the field with them. So when you guys are out sampling or when you're in the lab, having this handy is sort of how it was designed to be used. And so what it does is gives you a summary table up here of all the parameters that you'll be collecting in the field and measuring yourself. So it will give you the number of samples all in the past, the minimum value, the maximum value, your median, and your range. And so what we want to see with this tool is when you're sort of collecting your samples and say doing your titration, you can use whatever value you come up with and check it with your historical values to see if it's in line with your historical trends for your specific station. And so for for pH, you can look up here in this summary table and check it in this area. And then also you can do that for phenolphthalein alkalinity. You can do it for the rest, but they are graphed as well. And so they're graphed in a box plot. So in the upper one here, we have temperature in red and dissolved oxygen in sort of the teal blue color. And it's broken down by month. So with your box plot, as a little refresher, you have whiskers at the bottom and the top. You have this thick black line in the middle, and that's going to be your median. And then you have the start of the box and the top of the box, which are your quartiles. And so we expect to find most of our data inside the box. So if you are taking a measurement and say you take say a temperature measurement in January, and it turns out the water temperature is 10 degrees, you might want to redo that temperature measurement or something really concerning is happening in that river. Same thing with your titrations. Let's say you're doing your hardness titration in the month of June here, and you get a value of 45. That's awesome. It's sort of right in line with our historical trends. Whereas if you got a value for your total hardness of 80, you might want to redo the titration, or maybe you have done it a few times and everything's correct. We really want you guys to let us know if that's the case, because maybe something's wrong with your chemicals, or again, there's something strange going on in the stream. And so you do get some description in here, and then also some troubleshooting, which sort of follows the steps that I just went through. And so to find the tool, again, it's in this Google Drive folder that I zoomed out a ton on. And so it's broken down by station number. So we have the years generated, station 5 to begin with. And again, these are just for stations that have 30 or more samples. We sort of made that cutoff because once you get lower, the monthly box plots don't entirely work. And so you'll notice that there's 2 station 5s. I was showing you the PDF, which is great for printing, using in the field. The other option that you can see here is the HTML file, which is more of an interactive file that will hopefully load. And when you click on these, hopefully, yes, you'll get this scary wall of text that means nothing. What you need to do is actually download it with this download button up here. And then once it's downloaded, not letting you download it here. Once it's downloaded, you can sometimes this will also pop up, the open with Google Chrome option. And that's awesome when it does. It's the same, basically the same thing as if you download it. So when we click open with Chrome, it will open in a new window here. And so like I was saying, this HTML is a little bit different in that the graphs are going to be interactive. So if you hover over them, it will give you your max value, your third quartile value, median on that black line, first quartile, and minimum value. And so cool thing about this format, which I'll touch on more in the Shiny app itself, but you can sort of enable just temperature and disable dissolved oxygen here by clicking on the variable. And same thing down below. So there's two formats that you can use. The PDF and the HTML for this first one. And really this one was intended to be used in the field. And so with that, are there any questions about this first one before I move on to the next tool?
I think the only other thing that I'm going to caution is like, this is a tool that doesn't mean we want you to like call Bradley and Michaela every time your data is out of these ranges, which is why there's these troubleshooting tips on the back that says, okay, you're out of your monthly range. What are your steps? Maybe just verified, was your math done correctly? Did you multiply by 20 or 40? And then maybe retitrate if it's one of the titrations. So that would be true for dissolved oxygen, for alkalinity, and for hardness. Those are ones that could be done again. That temperature piece, like most people have a good smell check, right? Like in the winter, we expect colder temperatures. In the summer, generally warmer.
My candy news these.
Those are just things to look at. Noah, you want to stop sharing your screen just for a little bit? It looks like Jeremy has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to confirm. I think I know the answer to this, but when it says number of samples, is that for like all of time, the entire Riverwatch database?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yep.
And
So
until when?
What was that?
Up through when?
So the way it works is there's sort of a bulk download of data. And that bulk download happened, I think, in January. So it's through January 2022.
Okay, great. And thank you. This is awesome, by the way.
I have a quick question. So I don't really know how websites work, but if you wanted to say like a group wanted to embed this HTML, whatever it is, ML into their website, can they just copy that link that you did and put it on their website? Is that kind of the purpose of that?
So the link will go to the Google Drive. That raw brick of text is just how Google Drive sort of will render it as a preview.
Okay, so it's separate.
I think there's a little bit you can with HTML files, a little bit beyond my skill set.
Same. All right, no worries. Thank you.
Barb, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, it's just to reiterate your comment that what this is doing is helping you show how well you might have characterized the distribution that might actually exist out there for a particular parameter. And how much, so the more samples you have, the better the War and Peace novel. And you have to cut that off or you're really just not telling that story. And I would just, you have this in your sort of to-do list, but there's been ample events, times when the data doesn't match, and what you're trying to do as a volunteer is eliminate any error that you've introduced into it that might explain that difference, as opposed to a real difference that might exist from year to year, especially given the strange climate change and effects that has on some of these parameters. So I wouldn't want volunteers to feel like they have to make it be the same or it's wrong. But you want to have an open mind to the scientific theory process, that you just want to be eliminating introduced errors so that you're accurately characterizing the distribution of that parameter.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great point. Of one of the limitations of this is in a lot of stations, I think people are seeing sort of drifting results from historical trends. And so this doesn't really capture sort of newer changes. It is just a summary of what has been the case in the past.
But it also lets volunteers be that first line of defense. After you've verified your procedures, what if something is different? And certainly we've all seen this, and we live in Colorado to know that, you know, a mine, the activity might change and all of a sudden we see something really different on the landscape. And you all with your boots right in the ground will be the first to kind of acknowledge that. So this is a tool that maybe helps us look at that from this field data a little bit more critically.
Awesome. So if there's no more questions, we can go on to the second one.
We might as well, because you've got 3 to get to, Noah.
So I am not going to spend quite as much time on this one. I think we haven't generated them all yet. We're still sort of putting the final touches on it, but it will live here in the next couple days in the 2.0 summarized data by station. And so again, similar setup. These will all just be HTML files. And so when we do generate them, all of them will live here. And so I have some examples in here for the time being. And so we can do station 28 again. And again, it will open up this big chunk. And I'm in an incognito browser, which is why it's not letting me download things right now. Shouldn't be the case for you guys. Let me just switch real quick. Okay, same folder. And so if we go to station 28 again, we can either click the download button, or if this pops up for you, click open with Google Chrome. And so with this one, we took sort of the limitations of that first tool, where it is summarizing just the field data that volunteers are collecting, and we sort of wanted to include the metals data as well. And it morphed into almost all of the parameters being included here. So this will give a little more information and background, and there's a little more to read through. So if you are interested in this, I'd encourage you to download it and play around with it. But quick overview is it has the table value standards, as well as the observed sample value. And so again, these are just the table value standards for every station. Some stations might have different standards for different water body IDs. And so if you are really interested in that, you can go to the CDPHE websites and look at the site-specific standards. But this is sort of a good baseline to reference to go off to give a little bit of background for your samples and what you're actually collecting. And so if you click through the tabs, you'll be able to sort of read a little bit about each parameter. And also for our 9 metals, we have the standards. And then sort of our cations, we have total and dissolved values. And again, you can see these trends over time, which was sort of lacking in that first tool. And so if we have dissolved zinc here, and you can see this really nice downward trend. And so we have almost all of the parameters in here. And again, they're in these tabs with a little bit more information about them. And I'm not, so I'll let you guys play around with this one if you're interested, but a lot of it is going to be repeated in the shinyapp. And so I think I'll just jump to that.
Maybe real quick, any questions on this one? I think Noah just threw a lot at you for a moment.
I definitely threw a lot at you.
I have one. This is Barb. Is the metals concentrations standards you're using, are you using the same one across all, like cold water trout for zinc, or are you actually using the standards that are in regulation, the Arkansas regulation for that water body ID for that station?
So here is just table value standards for the state. We're not specifying water body ID.
Okay. So my only recommendation is you're clear about that, because it could vary by water body ID.
Yeah, we have a little note on top. We can make it a little bit more clear.
Yeah, and just for everybody else who doesn't say table value standards, you know, every working day, right? This is kind of the baseline criteria for all standards throughout the state, right? So zinc, there's this established value that's based on hardness. And again, Noah's showing you a lot, but you know, there's some text in here that describes that relationship between hardness and these different parameters, but also this developing that these standards change all the time. So not only is Jeff here, which is really awesome, and Alex Townsend, who now helps manage this water body, but you know, here's going from kind of Leadville down to Buena Vista, and this is Jeff's station there. Let's see, 28 is that Otero Pump Station, or that's Johnson Village?
That's
okay.
Johnson Village.
Right, so Johnson Village here at Buena Vista shows this decreasing line and trend in zinc. And if that red is the acute state standard for aquatic life and the orange is that chronic, you kind of see these numerous points in the early 2000s where sometimes those standards were exceeded. And slowly we're getting towards these lower zinc concentrations, which again is just this baseline data is critical that shows this long-term trend captured by Jeff and his students of these decreasing trends, which is again, why your monthly collection is so important. So you see, hey, here's this seasonal influence. We see zinc going up and going down throughout the year. And so there's a lot to pull out of there. Noah, in this format, can you zoom in on parts of your graph?
Yep, so this is also sort of an interactive graph. So if you want to sort of highlight a specific area or change the scale, you can drag with your mouse over a specific area and zoom in. And again, let's say maybe you're not interested in seeing the standards, you can turn them off and just have our measured zinc values.
Cool.
Can you all take a picture of that, Noah, and put it in some report that you're writing for your watershed group or for your teacher?
Yep, and you can also come up here. There's more controls for the graphs. And one of them is you can download the plot as a picture. And so you will have a downloaded picture of that plot. So it's great in this format. And then in the shinyapp, it's even more interactive, so you can customize it a little bit more.
This is great, and it would go well for teachers, Megan, hooked up with the two, I don't know what you're calling them, but the modules that are being used for the standards, you know, but you could still use them for educational purposes. So when we get the Clean Water Act module done, it could complement this to help the learning and the questions and the assumptions that are not really apparent. Trend is a scary word to use when that's often used in a statistical sense. It kind of got usurped, even though trend has a lot of other meanings. So, you know, using the right language and messaging, like here is a pattern, and being careful so it has the right implication in the right hands in order to not, you know, harm Riverwatch, but serve the purpose that it's meant to do.
Absolutely.
I have another question. This is Jeremy. And sorry if you already addressed this and I missed it, but in the first tool, I see all the, what looks like all the stations, including ours. In the second tool, I only see 5 stations. Did you already mention that?
Yeah, I quickly went over it. So sort of 1 or 2 more things that I want to add text-wise in here. So we haven't generated very many of these. I just put sort of 5 in there as an example. But in the next couple of days, there should be a lot more.
And part of that reason, Jeremy, is to like provide some more context, like why do we care about aluminum? What's the purpose? How does it affect aquatic life? How does it get into our water in the first place? So that can get longer, and that's what this second tool allows us to do. That first one is a, you know, you can flip your paper over, right? You have one there that I just delivered, you know, the other week, right? Where it's a one side, you know, 2-sided sheet, but this one, you know, can let us go into a little bit more depth. Maybe you're doing a project on selenium and you really want to dive into that. So that's part of the reason that these aren't done, is that we're still curating some additional contexts to add into this particular tool before we generate hundreds of them.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think let's move on to the Shiny app.
Why do you call it a shiny app, Noah?
This is an R Shiny app. So it's sort of the framework it's built around. And so this is going to be the most interactive version, and sort of it combines elements from each of the last 2 tools, and also combines sort of that spatial component where all of our stations are around the state into one platform. And so this Riverwatch data tool is really exciting. And so when you open it, you'll just get launched into this first screen where you have a map down here and you have some inputs up here to specify what graph you want. And so by default, we'll have all of our active stations across the state displayed to begin with. And so you can use this map to get a little bit of information about each station by hovering. And I'm sure this is probably really small on a shared screen. Let's see if we can zoom in a little.
It looks okay, Noah.
Okay. Yeah, and so interactive map where we have by default just our active stations. Hover over one to get information. And if you're interested in non-active, all of the historic Riverwatch stations, you can enable that. You know, just a testament to how much coverage across the state Riverwatch has had over the years. We'll leave it on active, and also the other layers that you can use. You can get satellite view. I'll keep it on street map. You can also have see which basins are located across the state. And if you click, you will get the name. And if you do want to enter full screen, there is a full screen mode where you can just exclusively look at your stations. And so let's say we can go down to some of the Durango stations down in Southwest Colorado. And let's say we find a station we're interested in down here in Durango. This is station 90. And so if we're interested in it, we can either come up here and scroll or type in station 90. And the other option is just to click on station 90. And so when you click on station 90, a couple other options will come up. So you have the parameter, and we have all of the parameters that Riverwatch collects in here. You can scroll and choose any of the parameters that you want. The next option will be your graph type. So we have our time series right now. You can do multiple stations, which I'll get to in a second, or like that first tool, you can also break it down monthly with a box plot. And also down here on the map again, the station that you have selected will be highlighted or outlined in that sort of red halo with a little bit more station metadata displayed along with it. And so maybe, there we go. This one has a little more constant coverage. And so, you know, just looking here, you can see that they started all the way back in 1992. And from that bulk data download, the most recent point that we have to display here is going to be in 2021 last year. And so we can change the parameter and maybe look at pH on the Animas River. And you can see sort of this, all the data points over time for pH for this time series. And if you wanted to see monthly, you can do a box plot. And on here, on some of the parameters, just like in the last sort of document I was showing you where we had the aquatic life standards, this will pop up, this checkbox to calculate the aquatic life standards. And if you click it, the graph will change so that our chronic pH levels are displayed. So this is, I would just encourage you to play around with this. And I guess one of the things I forgot to mention is our date slider. So if you wanted to change the dates that you have and sort of maybe get rid of this 5-year gap or so, or a 2-year gap where there was no data, you can change the dates that you're looking at on the graph with the date slider. Similar, graph is interactive. You can download a picture up here with that same button, and it'll go straight to your downloads. And then also, we have the map selected, but if you want, you can go to the data table tab where you can see the data that's being used for the graph itself. And so this will change with the date slider, and it will display, it has all of the Riverwatch parameters. It's not limited to total hardness like we have selected now. And if you're interested in, say, playing around with it more for yourself, or you want the data, you can either click this copy button and it will copy it to your clipboard where you can then paste it into Excel or another program, or you can click on the download button and get the data for station 91 in our date ranges as a CSV or Excel file. And so let's go back to the map and go sort of, here's our box plot, again, summarized by month for total hardness. And I'll give an example with this time series multiple stations option, where we can add more stations that we're interested in. And maybe let's go over to the Roaring Fork for this, if I can find it. And so a lot of Riverwatch groups have sort of an above and below station. So we'll use this from the Roaring Fork Conservancy as an example, where here, station 7890 is above Sunlight Ski Resort. So we click it and it will show up. And say we're interested in the station that's below Sunlight, 789. And so then we have our station number that we can see here. And if we type in 789 and press enter, we will have our two stations graphed next to each other. So red up here above sunlight, and our below sunlight station down here. And so you can play around with this with all the parameters. This is total hardness, where we see pretty similar results above and below sunlight. Let's say we're interested in maybe some of the salts. And so if you come down here and we want to look at sodium, we can see the below station ends quite a bit higher than above. And so you can also add more than one station to this. So maybe we also want to graph 785 while we're at it. We can enter 785 and, I'm going to mispronounce that. Bershani Ranch will pop up in blue here. So this sort of first tab is meant for individual stations or multiple stations. And again, if you're in this first time series, some of the parameters that have standards, we can calculate our aquatic life standards with this button. And again, that will give you our observed value, calculated chronic and acute, similar to before. And it will change the scale because obviously our chronic value is so much higher, and it's great to see lead pretty much 0.
Hey, no, I have a quick question. Can you display one or the other on the figure, or will it just automatically put both on for the chronic and acute standards?
Yeah, so if you wanted to get rid of, say, calculate the acute, you can click this. It won't auto scale for you, but then you can go in and zoom in however far you want.
Awesome, thank you.
And so there's lots of functionality in here. I think I'll use the next tab as sort of to go through some more of the functions within the graph. And so the other major tab that we have is to group our stations instead of by single station, there are a couple, to group it by our river or our water body ID. So if we go over here, again, our map will pop up, but you'll notice that there's no stations displayed. And so we want to first select our watershed or basin up here. And so if we stick on the Arkansas River, we can then either sort our stations by river or by our water body ID. So if we do it by river, we'll have all of the rivers that Riverwatch is sort of stationed on in this drop down. And so some creeks or rivers will have a good amount of data along them, and some will have like maybe a single data point to work with. So this is going to vary depending on sort of where our Riverwatch stations are distributed. But the option is there to group it, and it will then display on the map what stations you're actually looking at. And this will change with your date slider. So if you cut off the dates, some of our stations will disappear as they're not being graphed anymore. And so again, you can choose from your parameters. You can choose your creek or river. And if we wanted to do the whole Arkansas plus some points that need to be cleaned up a little bit, we can see all of our stations along the Arkansas River. And so again, this is a massive, massive area, but we have our temperature from the Arkansas River. And so this option down here, we do have a trend line option to click. It should be noted, it is highly dependent on how much data is available and how it's distributed. So it's really only showing the trend for our stations that we have as Riverwatch. And, this is monthly sampling. Ideally, sometimes there's further time in between, but if we click it, it will calculate a trend line for this station where we can see it's been relatively stable as our average temperature. And so the other way to group our stations is if we come back up by our graph by option, is water body ID. It's gonna produce a quick error that should go away. And so here we can choose a water body ID that we're interested along the Arkansas. And again, all of the Riverwatch stations that we have, it will display their water body ID here. And similar to the last option, where it will map the stations that you're looking at on the map or on the graph itself, sorry. And again, if you want to say just isolate station 5, you can double click it and we will only be looking at station 5 data. Or if we wanted to get rid of station 5, click it once and station 5 does not show up anymore on the graph. And the final feature with this is, again, when you're in this water body ID area, if you wanted the aquatic life standards for the water body ID, you can click it here. And this is for the calculated standards. It's working off of our titrated hardness values. And also similar to the last area, we have all of the data that's used in the graph that you can download. So starts at station 5 and eventually works up to station 326 or 531 for our most recent sample. And the final tab here is a user guide that sort of walks through what is in here and sort of how some of these calculations are done. With that, I might open it up to questions, or Megan, if there's anything big I missed, feel free to let me know.
The only thing big you missed is that this is big. Like, I still just get overwhelmed by how neat this is. And I think we're just starting to explore the possibilities behind this, right? You found this above and below sunlight, and a lot of Riverwatch stations were set up with, here's this incoming source of something that we want to keep tabs on. So I think there's been a few other questions. Barb asked, who is this tool intended for? And then, yeah, Alex said he's going to use it in his report. And Ashley said to investigate water quality problems we hear about, to get a baseline of history and data over time. Jeff says waiting for this for 30 years. So he says he's no longer going to retire, right? So I'll let you answer kind of intended audience or other things that you've thought about as you've built this, Noah.
Yeah, I mean, going into it, I think the biggest audience was having it for Riverwatch volunteers, so that instead of going into our database, downloading a CSV, and then either looking at all of these numbers or making a graph yourself, you can have a much more interactive way of doing it. Quickly visualize the data that you actually get to collect. And sort of an awesome byproduct of it is that if people want to, say, within CPW, if they're interested in a specific area, they can quickly look and see what Riverwatch data is already available for that area. and get sort of that baseline information that they might be looking for, or generate graphs that they're interested in that. So yeah, I think it's got a whole host of use in terms of teachers using it for education, teaching about sort of relationships. If they want to teach about the river continuum concepts, an awesome example is using this multiple station function, where you can pick a station sort of near headwaters on the river and work your way all the way down, and sort of see that hardness increase as you go down. So yeah, I think it's got a whole host of applications.
Jerry, I'm really glad you asked the question, who's going to keep this up to date? And that's always something that, you know, we think about when we have like these really brilliant people that join our team for a short period of time, is like what happens when we don't have Noah sitting in our office. And that is a really important thing that we thought about. And so Noah has not only created standard operating procedures for how we update this, but the beauty of this coding, and he keeps saying R and Shiny app, which again, for me are a little bit of a stretch, but it's a coding language that behind the scenes, you know, takes a lot of work to make it look so shiny and beautiful. But the neat thing is it's one download from our website, an Excel doc that we do when we update stations and new people come to our training, and we have an updated and curated list of active stations each year, that we just literally put that Excel version into a folder, change maybe the naming convention. And we haven't tried it out yet, but Noah's done this multiple times, and then it reads from that document. So that's really the beauty and the power of this, to be able to keep it up to date. Thanks for that.
I'm sorry, I got interrupted for a moment. You'll take the data that we submit to Riverwatch, you'll take one Excel spreadsheet, put that into a folder. Through the coding, it reads that folder, and then it deciphers everything, populates it, and it's shown on the map. Completely smoke and mirrors, voila, glitter, the angels sing.
Yeah, that's sort of the great thing about the Riverwatch database, is that it's tagged with all this awesome metadata along with what you're collecting. And so it really is, it downloads the same format every time you click download, with the same headers. So you can just replace the CSV file and have updated data.
Okay, the next party, I'm buying the first beer.
Looking forward to it.
I just wanted to jump in. A great display, Noah. I'm so proud of this tool. It looks, you showed us things today that I didn't even realize it could do, and I've seen it several times already, so thank you. This is more a plug to the audience. First of all, if you're a teacher, you should, you know, especially a STEM teacher, the R language is, it's a coding language that's free. It's a free program. And so that's why it's so popular. And part of when something's free like that, that means a lot of other people are using it. So you can Google, if you get stuck on something, you can Google it. And there's a whole population of people that are out there using it. So it's become more popular than a lot of other languages that have expensive software prices to them. But it's just a big capital letter R. But I wanted to make a plug on the Shiny app, just because it's also new. Right now, we're using a free version, I believe. And if we use more than 25 hours a month, then we pay for it, which is no big deal. And that's a bridge Riverwatch can cross easily if it's getting that much use, that's great. The plug is, if you open up the R Shiny app, don't just leave it as an open tab on your computer all the time in your background, because those are hours that it will count as use. And so if anybody does that, then there goes then we have to address the pricing sooner, which again is something we can deal with. I just would say go use it and save it, and then close it.
It should time out after 5 minutes of not touching it.
Oh, good. Okay.
Ideally.
Okay. Ideally, yeah. So yeah, use it as much as you can and as much as you want. Just shut her down. But hopefully it times out like Noah says. Thank you.
So another thought, Megan, this is really awesome. And of course, the bane of my existence for 33 years was figuring this out when there wasn't technology to do it. But I also am fully aware of there's a difference between looking at the data and being curious and critical thinking and looking at patterns and teaching the river continuum concept and all of that versus taking the leap to interpretation and understanding shiny. Why do you call it a shiny bell? I know in my career it's called a shiny bell and whistle because it's shit in, shit out, good stuff in, good stuff out. And so you have to be aware of apples and oranges and things like that in interpretation, and shiny bells and whistles, especially in the realm of community, citizen, volunteer science. You know, the assumptions that you're making, and you can't go beyond what the data is capable of telling you. And it's very easy to do with a shiny bell and whistle. So teachers would need, it's an awesome tool to help students figure out critical thinking in what is there and what isn't there. You know, for example, can you really compare a temperature pattern from 1990, Jeff, in your stations to, you know, another river on the San and on the Rio Grande to a data set that's last year, and not have any kind of depth of a conversation? That's apples and oranges. Also, just because there's an exceedance does not mean harm was caused. And that's Chris Thiel's whole world, is what really is attainment and assessment in the science world versus the policy world, and the differences there. So there's a lot of robust stuff to go through when you have this illustration and this tool. And I just would encourage you, Megan, you know how I feel about this, and providing the right kind of tutorials and education so that it's not misused, and again, comes back, and it just takes one person to fly off the handle with this kind of info, and it goes back on Riverwatch, and it's hard to recover that damage control. But if you've done the right educating and material that goes with the shiny bell and whistle, then you can basically protect the program and have the effect that you really want to have. Does that make sense, Jeff Kydale? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Barb, and Noah's like embedded a few like caveat, like these trend lines are like, this is, and it's almost like we planted you in the audience, right? Like before we even got to that, you were talking about pattern versus trend. So yeah, if anybody has additional suggestions about, you know, how we make that really clear, that again, Riverwatch has been about data collection, but, you know, starting to visualize data, I think, has been a desire of the program for a long time. I was comforted when you showed me some 2011 sheet of paper that said finish watershed reports. And this doesn't necessarily fix watershed reports, but it gets us a step further in starting to visualize some of that data and make some comparisons. Headwaters, tailwaters, upstream, downstream, you know, these different and very unique basins we have around the state.